Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the member for North East Bedfordshire, who is respected across the House for his compelling and emotional opening contribution. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Holocaust has always baffled me. If we're going to give away our ages, I was born 20 years after the events, and I've never understood how human beings and their millions could be so seduced by a message of hate that they could stand by and watch as other human beings were degraded, humiliated and murdered. How people could have stood at the entrance to those gas chambers in Auschwitz, stripping people of their belongings and their last remnants of dignity, knowing that the fate that lay in store for them was a 20-minute, excruciatingly painful journey to death. We're in the month of January, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the phrase "man's inhumanity to man" was first introduced in a poem by Robert Burns titled "Man Was Made to Mourn." And as poignant as those words are, I still don't think they convey the horrors that took place over 70 years ago. Probably like everybody else in the House, I've read the books, I've watched the documentary, I've seen the film Schindler's List, watched Band of Brothers, where the 101st Airborne Division liberated a sub-camp of Dachau concentration camp, and I've watched The World at War. But all those depictions of what took place failed to equal, in my opinion, the insight offered to me by a survivor, Harry Bibbering. I had the privilege to meet Harry in 2012. The Holocaust Educational Trust had suggested that I might like to encourage my local authority to have a survivor meet and talk to older pupils from high schools in my area. Harry was born in 1925 and lived in Vienna with his mother and father and his sister Gertie. His father owned a men's clothing shop, and for that time and place, his family were relatively well off. The young Harry remembered having family holidays. He enjoyed swimming and ice skating, and his mother and father were well off enough to be able to give him a season ticket for a membership for an ice skating rink in Vienna. And he remembered hanging out the window in Vienna, watching the Germans march in 1938. And he liked the soldiers. That was his memory. He liked the soldiers marching, and he liked the bright flags. But little did he know as a child that they were Nazi soldiers and that those bright flags were swastikas. Harry's membership of the ice skating rink was evoked just days later when the "No Jews Allowed" sign was erected. And in November 1938, Harry's father's business was destroyed during Kristallnacht. He was arrested soon after, and after he was released from prison, the family intended to flee to Shanghai, but his dad was robbed on his way to purchase tickets. Thinking, as any mother and father would, of the safety of their own children, Harry's parents arranged for him and his sister to flee on a kinder transport to the United Kingdom. And Harry's father had arranged for guarantors to pick them up when they arrived in the UK. Harry said, and I quote, "I remember going to the Vienna West Bahnhof with my sister and her parents to get on the train at 10 p.m. on the 13th of March 1939 with about 600 other kids. The following day, the train went slowly through Germany until it reached the Dutch border. Once it crossed over into Holland, we were met on the platform by Jewish volunteers from Holland who gave us sweets and toys. And we crossed to England on the night ferry from the Hook of Holland to Harwich and arrived at Liverpool Street Station in the afternoon of the 15th of March 1939. Harry wasn't to know when he left Vienna that that was the last time he would ever see his mother and father. They were killed by the Nazis. Harry and his sister Gertie survived, and Harry's still with us, and the world is an immeasurably better place with him in it. Looking back from 2014, I would like to think that I wouldn't have followed the crowd had I been in Germany at that time. I like to think I would have behaved like Irina Sender, who, as an honourable gentleman referred to, was a Polish lady who had done so much to protect Jewish people. She was honoured in 1965 by the State of Israel as righteous among the nations, because during World War II, Irina served as a plumber working in the Warsaw Ghetto, and she smuggled Jewish babies out of the ghetto at the bottom of her toolbox. She kept a dog in the back of her truck, which she trained to bark, in order that when Nazi soldiers approached, the barking covered the infant's noises that she'd saved. The Nazis eventually caught Irina. They sentenced her to death, and they broke both her arms and her legs. But she managed to evade execution, and she survived the war. Irina kept the details of all the children she saved in a glass jar that she buried in the back garden of her home, and she tried to locate their parents after the war. But sadly, most had perished in the gas chambers. I do wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I would have been brave enough to do something like that at the time. And Holocaust Memorial Day allows us to remember those that perished, those that survived, those who were brave beyond our comprehension, and it also challenges us to learn from the history to prevent such events happening again. That's an aspiration, but sadly Bosnia, Darfur and Rwanda remind us that history can repeat itself. Certainly.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much for giving way. I think that we do need to remember Holocaust Memorial Day, because across Europe now you've got national list systems for elections. So very small percentages of the population can vote to elect neo-Nazis, and so we have got to remember that this is going on and reinforce to people that 6 million of the Jewish community were murdered, and we must remember that and reinforce it to try and make sure that, because don't forget Hitler came up through partly democracy to start with, so we must never ever forget that and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely, I agree entirely with the honourable gentleman, and I appreciate other people want to speak, so I'll move on without taking any further interruptions. But the honourable member from North East Bedfordshire mentioned that politics were at the heart of this, and we must remember that it was the Treaty of Versailles which gave Hitler a platform on which to build that hatred, which led to the terrible atrocities of the Second World War. A twisted variety of politics, but politics nonetheless. But I'd like to finish in a positive note, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been very lucky in my life. I've visited both the Holocaust Museum in Washington, DC and Yad Vashem. And these museums are grim, and it can be an emotionally draining experience as you go through the exhibits. At the end of the exhibit in Washington, you pass through very long corridors, and at either side of the corridor there's huge glass containers. The glass containers are filled with spectacles, they're filled with shoes, and they're filled with the luggage, the possessions of the Holocaust victims. It really is a haunting end to an experience which you can never forget. But there's a video loop at the end, and a woman explains her personal story of liberation, how when she was emaciated, dehydrated, and thought that she was near the end of her life, she was picked up by a soldier. And she tells the soldier that he can't touch her because she's Jewish. And he replied, fighting back the tears, "I am Jewish too." The gentleman was a GI. After the war, they were married and they settled in the United States of America. Madam Deputy Speaker, a triumph of the human spirit over evil, and another reason why we should always remember Holocaust Memorial Day.
Order. The House will be aware that there are